Hi everyone, this is Craig, and what we'd like to share with you today is how we think that COVID-19 is resetting some values and priorities in society and what this could mean for brands both in the short term and in the long term. Now, one thing that COVID-19 has shown us or highlighted to us is the existing inequalities in society. So when the government gave a grant of 5,000 baht to those working in the informal workforce in Thailand, there were 28 million people applied, which just goes to show how many people are living hand to mouth in society and reliant on food banks and handouts from the government. It's also just reminding us what a disposable culture that we live in. All the face masks and other equipment we're using and all the deliveries we're getting from restaurants to eat in our home all relies on this disposable trash, which has been increasing recently. So it's just a reminder of that fact. Now, of course, many of our livelihoods have been threatened, our way of life has been changed massively. But actually there's been a real positive side to this, and we've seen some magic happens when we stop as humans. So we've seen in many Asian cities pollution levels drop to record levels, so we can actually, for many of us, breathe clean air and see clear skies for the first time in a very long time. And as we take up less space on the Earth, we actually allow more space for the other inhabitants of the Earth to occupy. So there's some wonderful stories of turtles returning to Thai beaches to lay eggs and other great stories like this. And this really makes us stop and think about what kind of world we want to live in. So we're in this really introspective moment in society. Do we want to go back to how things were, or do we want to create something new? Particularly when scientists are telling us that if we don't stop destroying the environment, we're going to face pandemics that are even worse in future. So it's with that thought in mind that we wanted to ask some key questions which this presentation will address, which is really looking at the roles that brands can play in this crisis, whether it be health and well-being or the role in the community, and also asking this central question about how can brands ensure a sustainable future. So our views today are based on extensive secondary research and cultural analysis, which has been carried out across 17 countries with the help of a number of partners. So let's turn to this first question about how brands can help with people's health and well-being. Now, there's an immediate need that brands need to address. So those brands that have been continuing to do business need to reassure the safety of their customers. So the immediate concerns is that customers don't come into contact with the virus. So brands need to offer this first line of defense. And we've seen examples from McDonald's going to extreme lengths to make sure all their processes ensure the safety of customers. But also Starbucks with a clever use of their app to facilitate mobile and contactless ordering and payment. But there's also other opportunities for brands with other health concerns that people have. Now, one thing that we've learned about COVID is the people at risk are those with underlying health conditions, or at least the majority of people at risk. So a lot has been talked about immunity, and we know that when we're suffering these health conditions, our immune systems are weak. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities for brands, particularly food and drink brands, that target the strengthening of people's immune systems. So this is going to be something to look out for. And that's what we would call the last line of defense. So making sure we've got healthy bodies in case we come into contact with the virus. Now, the physical aspect or the medical aspect gets a lot of media attention, but sometimes what deserves more attention is the psychological damage that is being done by this pandemic and having to lock ourselves away in the home. And Stephen Taylor talks about this in his book, The Psychology of Pandemics, and he argues it is actually the psychological impact in the longer term is of much greater damage to us in society. So, I think for brands need to recognise the incredible mental stress that we're facing at the moment with the threat to our livelihoods and just the stress of being in lockdown away from our normal activities and social connections. So brands need to be very careful in doing communication at this time and be very sensitive and show great empathy to the mindset of people. And some brands have done great work in this area. So, for example, Burger King in France, recognising the things that people are missing, feel they're missing out on, have come up with a campaign to show how to create your own Whopper burger at home. And many of us over a certain age would remember the Budweiser What's Up campaign as well. And this has been resurrected recently to get across this message of staying in touch and feeling connected with friends. So I'm now going to hand over to Neil, who's going to talk about the role that brands can play in the community.
Thanks, Craig. So, as Craig mentioned, the pandemic and lockdown are very stressful. I think also just the fact of living a virtual life and a contactless life are also incredibly stressful. And one of the best known cures for stress is human touch. It's really important for signaling safety and trust. It's the first sense that develops in the womb, and some of you will know that it's associated with the love hormone, the so-called love hormone, oxytocin. So as a trivial example, restaurant tips are shown to increase when the waitress or the waiter taps you on the shoulder as they give you the bill. Not that they can do that at the moment, of course. But there are alternatives to stress. They're not complete substitutes, but they help, and they have some of the same chemical effects in the brain. One is just smiling, having fun, laughing. So humor's very important. And brands sometimes avoid humour, but I think if done well and done sensitively, it's a great way of connecting with people, as we saw in those examples. Another thing that can create that same kind of effect of reducing stress is singing, and singing together particularly. That triggers chemicals in the brain again. It, as well as being a way of connecting with other people, it, I think, really builds a sense of community. And we've seen that in Italy. This picture's from Israel and other countries. And it's the community, I think, that's really come to the fore during the crisis. Communities are really rallying around to help each other. And as a newcomer to Thailand, I literally moved to Bangkok just before everything locked down. Staying at home has really made me appreciate kind of what's local and close and personal. And we see that communities are the one, as in this example of the pantry of sharing. It's a great example of local communities helping each other at a difficult time. And look it up if you haven't seen it. And this is, I think, where brands can really step up to the mark as well and build those connections with local communities. Again, there are many examples of this in Thailand. This particular one is Top Supermarket, who have been partnering with the Ministry of Commerce to support Thai farmers and help them to sell fresh fruit. But there are many others. And what these kind of examples and this kind of coming together maybe indicate to us is, should we really be continuing with globalization as it's been working, or is there going to kind of be a resetting and a step back to thinking about more sustainable local economies and a greater focus on local businesses? And that brings me to sustainability of brands. So while we have this kind of focus on local communities, global companies have not been immune to the crisis. They've had some big challenges with their global supply chains. And again, maybe even they might start to question some of the benefits of globalization in that way. And I think they have some competitive challenges now. Um, and I put up an example of an Indonesian brand because I know it well, but it's a great example of how local brands in Asia are really competing and essentially beating some of the big global companies. Wardah started as a small local brand in Indonesia, and over the last 10 or more years have become the number one brand, taking share from Unilever and P&G and the other big multinational companies, and doing that through having that local cultural connection and roots in the local economy and communities. And I think increasingly we're seeing that big global brands are struggling in that battle because the local brands now have the technology, they have the know-how to be just as good as global brands. So the global brands, their big benefit has been the economies of scale. That's no longer a big advantage. And it kind of highlights as well, I think, the importance of messaging that is relevant for a local audience. And I'm sure, like me, you've received lots and lots of very well-meaning but probably fairly useless messages over the last few weeks from many businesses who you probably haven't talked to for a long time. And it kind of highlights the importance of not just saying things, but what you actually do as a business. And to me, it's really kind of brought me to rethink that brands really need to think much more directly about how they provide empathy, understanding, and above all, practical help for people. Not just saying nice things, but actually doing things which help people to cope in difficult times. And what I think sometimes this lack of action, or even sometimes the wrong actions, exposes is what the underlying values of brands really are. Building trust is a long-term process. It's not a short-term opportunity. And also, like those very practical, specific, local, targeted actions, I think speak much more loudly than very lofty global ideals. So this kind of really brings me to our conclusion. You might have seen this diagram before. It's not new, but I think it's never been more relevant, because what COVID has exposed is that the environment is really important for our long-term health and wellness, that communities and connection are really important in our lives, and that the brands that are going to be the most sustainable over the long-term future are those that are able to work with society and with the environment to create a sustainable future. So thank you very much for listening, and please do get in touch if you'd like to know more about this work.